1:30 a.m. After a 3-alarm fire, I came home covered in soot. From our bedroom, a guy yelled, "Relax, he's not home yet." When I opened the door and my fiancée saw my helmet. I came home at 1:30 in the morning, still wearing my turnout pants, boots half unlaced, jacket unzipped because my chest felt too tight after the fire. The air outside still smelled like wet ash and burned insulation. My helmet was in my hand because I had forgotten to clip it back onto the rig, and I did not realize it until I was already driving. The 3-alarm fire had gone bad early and stayed bad until the end. 2 families lost their homes. One guy barely made it out before the stairwell collapsed, and my hands were still shaking in a way that had nothing to do with adrenaline anymore. The house lights were on when I pulled into the driveway. That should not have been strange, but it felt wrong immediately. Lauren always turned everything off when she went to bed, especially on nights when I worked late. She said it helped her sleep. The porch light was on too, bright and steady, like someone had been coming and going. I stood there longer than necessary, helmet hanging from my fingers, listening. Music was playing inside, low but intentional. Not background noise. Something chosen. I could hear laughter, not muffled or cautious, but loose and comfortable. The sound came from the bedroom. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The floor was clean. Too clean. My boots left dark marks immediately, streaks of soot and water across the tile. No one reacted. The music did not stop. The laughter continued, followed by a male voice calling out from down the hallway, casual and amused, saying something about relaxing because I was not home yet. The words landed wrong. Not just because they were about me, but because of how sure he sounded. I walked down the hallway without slowing. I did not call out. I did not clear my throat. The helmet was still in my hand, blackened and scratched. The department number faded on one side from heat. When I reached the bedroom door, it was half open. The light was on inside. Lauren was sitting on the edge of the bed. She was not scrambling for clothes or trying to hide anything. That hit harder than if she had panicked. Evan stood near the dresser, barefoot, one of my shirts on him. He turned first. His expression shifted from relaxed to confused in a way that suggested a mistake in timing rather than guilt. Lauren looked up next. Her eyes went past my face and locked onto the helmet. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. No sound came out. For a moment, nobody moved. The music kept playing. The clock on the nightstand read 1:31. I noticed details instead of reacting. My side of the closet door was open. A section of hangers was empty. Not all of them, just enough to be noticeable if you knew what was usually there. A pair of unfamiliar shoes sat by the bed, placed neatly, not kicked off in a hurry. The sheets were not tangled. This had not been rushed. Evan glanced at the helmet again, then at me, as if trying to match what he was seeing with what he had assumed. He knew my schedule. That was clear now. He had expected me to be on shift for at least another few hours. Lauren finally stood up. She took one step toward me, then stopped. Her face was pale, but not shocked. More like interrupted. I turned and walked out before anything could be said. I did not slam the door. I did not raise my voice. I walked back down the hallway, through the living room, past the framed engagement photos still hanging on the wall. One of them had been turned slightly, like someone had brushed against it recently. In the garage, I checked my truck out of habit. The passenger seat was pushed back farther than I ever set it. The glove compartment was not fully closed. When I opened it, my spare key was gone. That was when the shape of it started to come together. I got in the truck and sat there with the engine off. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I did not check it. I could still smell smoke on my skin. The fire kept replaying in fragments, overlaid now with the bedroom scene, the calm in Evan's voice, the way Lauren had looked at the helmet instead of me. After a few minutes, I pulled away from the house and drove without a destination. At a red light, I finally checked my phone. There were notifications I had ignored earlier during the call. A bank alert from our joint account, a calendar update I did not recognize, and a missed call from a number I did not have saved. I opened the bank app. There had been a withdrawal earlier that evening. Not large enough to trigger anything automatic, but recent. The description was vague, something generic that could have been anything. I scrolled back further. There were others, spread out, small enough not to stand out individually. At another light, I checked the calendar update. It was from our wedding planner, Megan, confirming a vendor meeting that had already happened. The wording assumed my presence. There was no apology for my absence, no question about rescheduling, just a note about decisions that had been finalized. I pulled into an empty parking lot and shut the engine off. My hands were steady now. Too steady. I started going through messages I had skimmed past over the last few months. Canceled plans that had been explained away with vague reasons. Changes that had felt off, but not alarming at the time. Patterns formed quickly once I looked for them. Lauren had always said she hated my shifts, hated how unpredictable the job was, how it made her feel like she was waiting around. I had believed that meant she was lonely. I had not considered that it made me convenient. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Lauren. I let it ring until it stopped. I drove back toward the station without going inside the house again. In the locker room, I changed out of my gear and washed my hands longer than necessary. The water ran dark before it cleared. My captain, Derek, saw me and asked if everything was okay. I told him the fire had followed me home. He nodded like he understood, and maybe he did, just not in the way I meant. I sat on the bench and checked my phone again. There were messages now. Lauren asking where I had gone. Evan had not reached out at all. That absence mattered more than anything else. Before dawn, I learned 2 more things. The emergency contact on Lauren's medical file had been changed weeks earlier. It was not me. And a package had been delivered that afternoon, signed for by Evan, addressed to a name that was not his, but was close enough to mine to slip past casual notice. By the time the sun came up, the night felt less like a surprise and more like the end of a process I had never been told about. The fire had not ruined my house. It had just brought me home early enough to see what was already gone. I did not sleep after leaving the station. I sat in my truck for a while, watching the sky lighten, then drove to a diner that opened early for construction crews and night shift workers. I ordered coffee and nothing else. The waitress recognized me from my gear and asked if it had been a bad one. I nodded. It was easier than explaining. By the time the sun was fully up, my phone was heavy with messages. Lauren's tone shifted every few minutes, moving from confusion to apology to irritation, like she was cycling through strategies and checking which one might work. I did not answer. I was not trying to punish her with silence. I was trying to hear my own thoughts clearly for the first time in months. I opened the bank app again and started exporting statements. The withdrawals went back further than I had expected. They were irregular, deliberately uneven, sometimes weeks apart. They aligned too neatly with my longer shifts, especially the ones I picked up to cover for guys with kids or injuries. The total amount was not catastrophic, but it was enough to tell a story. Someone had been careful. I drove to the wedding planner's office mid-morning without calling ahead. Megan looked surprised to see me, then relieved, then confused, all within a few seconds. She asked if everything was okay with the venue changes. I asked what changes she meant. She hesitated before saying Lauren had requested several adjustments recently, including seating and accommodations, because Ryan's schedule was too demanding. I asked who attended the last meeting. Megan glanced at her notes and said Lauren and her partner. She corrected herself quickly, saying she meant fiancé, then stopped talking entirely when she realized what she had said. I did not correct her. I asked for copies of every document, every invoice, every communication. She gave them to me without argument. Outside, I sat in the truck again and read through emails I had never seen. Evan's name did not appear, but his presence was implied everywhere. Decisions made, preferences expressed, approvals given, all attributed to Ryan and Lauren. The language was confident, authoritative, like someone wearing my name comfortably. My phone rang. This time it was Paula, Lauren's mother. Her voice was strained, polite in the way people get when they sense something serious but do not know how bad it is yet. She asked why Lauren had told her I was thinking about stepping back from the relationship. I told her I had not said that. There was a pause on the line that lasted long enough to say everything. Paula mentioned that Lauren had introduced Evan to them weeks ago as someone helping her manage the stress of my job. The phrasing stuck with me. Helping her manage my absence. Not helping her cope. Helping her transition. I ended the call and drove home for the first time since the night before. Evan's car was gone. Lauren was there. She looked tired now, not panicked, not apologetic, just worn down. She asked if we could talk. I told her I needed to collect some things. She followed me room to room, explaining without saying anything concrete, filling the space with words that did not land. In the bedroom, my side of the closet was emptier than I remembered. A box sat on the floor, already taped shut. My name was written on it in marker, neat and centered. That detail felt more final than anything else. I opened drawers and found items missing that I used daily. Things I would have noticed eventually, but not right away. The slow removal of presents. In the bathroom, my toothbrush was gone. Not thrown away. Removed. Lauren said she had not meant for me to find out like this. That phrase told me more than she realized. There was a way she had planned for me to find out. Or not find out at all. I took the box and left again. In the driveway, my neighbor Tom asked if everything was okay. He said he had seen someone else coming and going late at night, and assumed we had family visiting. I told him I was heading out for a few days. He nodded and went back inside. At a storage unit I had rented years earlier and forgotten about, I put the box down and sat on the concrete floor. I opened my phone and checked my credit report. There were no new accounts, but there were inquiries I did not recognize. Recent ones. Close together. I called the bank and asked to speak with someone about account access. The woman on the line was calm and thorough. She confirmed that Lauren had authorized a temporary card replacement recently, citing loss. The replacement had been mailed to a P.O. box. She gave me the number. I had never known about it. That afternoon, I met with my captain again. Derek listened without interrupting as I explained the situation in practical terms, not emotional ones. I asked if anyone had requested shift changes on my behalf. He pulled up records and frowned. There had been several requests made through informal channels, all justified with personal reasons attributed to me. He said he would look into it. His expression suggested he already had concerns. By evening, I had spoken to a bank investigator named Lisa who explained that what I was describing was not uncommon. People often assume trust would cover documentation gaps. She said the overlap mattered. The timing mattered. The pattern mattered. When I drove past the house again that night, the lights were off. Lauren had left. Or Evan had. Or both. I did not stop to check. At the station, I sat alone and reviewed everything I had gathered so far. The affair was real, but it was not the core problem. The core problem was that my life had been used as infrastructure for someone else's plans. My income, my schedule, my absence, all of it had been treated like fixed assets. The fire from the night before came back to me then. The way the building looked stable until it was not. The way damage stayed hidden until pressure found it. By the end of the second day, I understood that this was not a mistake or a moment. It was an overlap. Two versions of my life running at the same time, and only one of them included me. The third day started with movement, not thought. I woke up on a narrow cot at the station and immediately began making calls while the building was still quiet. The goal was not confrontation. The goal was containment. By then, I understood that anything left uncontained would spread. I drove to the bank first and met Lisa in person. She laid everything out on a conference table with the precision of someone who had seen this pattern before. The account access logs showed consistent timing. Activity clustered around my extended shifts and overtime runs, especially nights when I was assigned to multi-unit coverage. The replacement card request was not an isolated event. There were 2 others months earlier that had been canceled just before shipping, which meant someone had tested the process before committing to it. Lisa explained that identity overlap mattered more than motive. Documents submitted under my name had been used to validate applications that benefited Evan. It was not theft in the obvious sense. It was substitution. My profile filled gaps that his could not. That was why things had progressed without triggering alarms. The system saw continuity. The system saw stability. From the bank, I went straight to the property management office. The manager, Anthony, recognized my name immediately and seemed relieved when I walked in alone. He said he had been uncomfortable approving the lease addendum, but had been reassured by documents showing joint consent. The documents were real enough. My income statement, my address, my signature replicated well enough to pass casual inspection. Anthony pulled the file and slid it across the desk. Evan's name appeared as an additional occupant, not a primary. The justification was temporary residency during a transitional period. The phrase was consistent with what Paula had said. Transition. The word followed me through every conversation now. I asked when the addendum had been filed. Anthony checked and told me it had been submitted on a night when I was on a long call. He had assumed Lauren was handling logistics because of my schedule. That assumption had been encouraged. By midday, the wedding venue called me. The cancellation I had initiated triggered a review. Contracts were clear. Liability fell where authorization had been granted. Lauren's name appeared alone on several approvals I had never seen. The deposits were partially refundable only under specific conditions that had not been met. The remaining balance would be due regardless. The total was not small. I forwarded everything to Lisa and let the systems continue their work. I did not call Lauren. She called me repeatedly. The tone of her messages changed again, shifting toward urgency. She mentioned misunderstandings. She mentioned stress. She mentioned my absence as if it were a force that acted independently of her. In the afternoon, I ran into Nathan outside a commercial building downtown. He worked with Evan. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me, but did not avoid me. We stood near the curb while traffic moved past us in steady waves. Nathan said Evan had talked about me more than he should have. Not in anger. In logistics. Like I was a variable in a plan. He said Evan had believed the transition would be clean once paperwork aligned. He said Evan had assumed I would not push back publicly because of my job. That assumption was everywhere now. People believed my role made me predictable, stable, quiet. By evening, Lauren's parents requested a meeting. I agreed on the condition that it be practical. We sat at their kitchen table, and I placed documents in front of them without commentary. Bank statements, lease records, email threads. They read quietly. Paula's hands shook slightly as she turned pages. Her husband stared at the table longer than necessary. They asked if I had known about the extent of it. I said no. They asked how long it had been happening. I said long enough. They did not defend Lauren. They did not attack her either. The silence between them felt like a recalibration. When I left, Paula said she was sorry. The words did not fix anything, but they mattered in a way I did not expect. The next morning, the collision became visible. Evan did not show up for work. Nathan texted me to say the office was buzzing. Evan's access badge had been flagged. Human Resources had questions about discrepancies in his residency claims and financial disclosures. He had built too much on borrowed structure. Once it was removed, nothing held. Lauren tried again to control the narrative. She told friends I had left without explanation. She told others the stress of my job had pushed her into a situation she could not manage alone. Those stories collapsed quickly when timelines failed to line up. People compared notes. Messages crossed. The overlap became obvious. I returned to the house one last time with a neutral third party present. The rooms looked staged now, stripped of warmth. Evan's belongings were gone. Lauren's remained, but the arrangement felt temporary, like she was waiting for something to settle before deciding what to keep. I collected the rest of my things and left keys on the counter. On the drive away, my phone buzzed with a notification from the bank confirming account separation. The language was dry. Final. That night, I slept deeply for the first time since the fire. The dreams were fragmented but quieter. When I woke up, there was a message from Lisa confirming that the documentation had been forwarded to the appropriate departments. She said outcomes would follow process. That was all. The following days moved quickly. Evan resurfaced briefly, attempting to contact Lauren, then disappeared again once it became clear there was nothing left to salvage. Lauren's employer requested clarification on residency inconsistencies. Her explanations did not satisfy them. The questions multiplied. I transferred stations quietly. No announcement. No explanation. The work continued as it always had. Fire still burned. Calls still came in. The difference was internal. I no longer assumed stability was permanent. By the end of the week, the house was listed for sale. Lauren moved out to a temporary place. The wedding was officially canceled. Vendors sent notices. Friends chose sides or stayed silent. The noise peaked and then faded. The collision had passed. What remained was the damage pattern. Clear. Documented. Irreversible. The fire that night had ended. The structure of my life had not collapsed because of heat or smoke. It had collapsed because too much weight had been shifted without my knowledge. Once the load changed, failure was inevitable. The last phase did not arrive with noise. It came quietly, the way smoke damage shows itself days after a fire, when walls cool and residue settles into places you cannot scrub clean. By the time everything stopped moving, there was nothing left to argue about. The systems had finished their work. All that remained was the outcome. I stayed off duty for a short stretch using accumulated leave. Not because I needed rest, but because I needed distance from routines that no longer fit. I moved into a small furnished place near the edge of my new district. It had neutral walls, a narrow kitchen, and no history attached to it. I bought a cheap coffee maker and a folding table and kept my life light enough to carry without effort. The house sold faster than expected. The market was favorable, and the listing agent did not ask questions. The proceeds went where contracts dictated. Lauren did not contest any of it. There was nothing to contest. The documentation had already closed every door that might have led to negotiation. By the time the sale finalized, the financial separation was complete. Lauren tried once more to reframe what had happened, not to me, but to others. The version changed depending on the audience. Stress. Miscommunication. My schedule. Her tone was calm, almost professional, as if distance alone could soften the facts. It did not work. The overlap had been too extensive. People could see where one story contradicted another. The details refused to line up. Her parents stopped intervening after the first week. They did not cut her off dramatically. They simply stepped back. Support narrowed to basics. Advice replaced assistance. The difference mattered. Stability shifted out of reach. At her job, the questions did not stop. Residency records conflicted with internal policies. Expense reimbursements raised flags. Nothing criminal surfaced, but enough inconsistency accumulated to erode confidence. She was placed on leave pending review. When the review concluded, her role was restructured in a way that removed advancement and flexibility. She stayed employed, but the future she had planned no longer existed. Evan vanished from relevance. His employment ended quietly after misrepresentation surfaced. No public accusation. No spectacle. Just termination and a non-committal reference policy. I heard later that he moved again, attempting to re-establish himself somewhere new. Without borrowed structure, progress slowed to a crawl. The pattern repeated itself in smaller ways. It always does. The wedding deposits were not recovered. Contracts enforced what had been signed. Vendors sent polite but firm notices. Lauren absorbed the cost alone. That detail mattered less for the money than for what it represented. Planning without consequence had finally met a boundary. I returned to work on a clear morning. The station felt unfamiliar but functional. New faces, new rhythms. No one asked for explanations. They did not need them. I performed the job the same way I always had. The difference was internal. I no longer assumed that order meant security. Weeks passed. The noise died down. Messages stopped arriving. The world moved on, as it always does. I did not seek closure conversations. I did not need final statements. Everything that mattered had already been said through action. One evening, while restocking equipment after a call, I noticed my helmet sitting on the bench where I had left it. Cleaned. Repaired. The department number restored. It looked the way it was supposed to look. Functional. Identifiable. Mine. That detail stayed with me longer than I expected. What followed was not recovery in the dramatic sense. It was recalibration. I simplified routines. I reduced exposure. I stopped assuming goodwill would cover gaps in structure. Trust became something earned through consistency rather than assumed through proximity. I heard from Lauren once more, months later, through a short message acknowledging the damage and wishing me well. There was no request attached, no apology framed for effect, just an acknowledgement that things had ended differently than she planned. I did not reply, not out of anger, out of completion. The furnished apartment became temporary, then permanent by choice. I kept it spare. I liked knowing exactly what belonged to me and why it was there. When I slept, it was uninterrupted. When I worked, it was focused. The fire that night faded into memory like most calls do. The betrayal did not linger as pain. It settled as information. Useful. Permanent. Some structures fail because of heat. Others fail because too much weight is shifted quietly, without inspection. By the time the failure becomes visible, the cause is already behind you. I had come home early because a fire ran out of patience. Everything that followed happened because someone else assumed I never would.